So, Connie, we're in one of those, maybe we're in one of those transitional moments like you were talking about. Maybe it's transitioning for the better or worse, and it depends on the sector. But how do you think about forming a strategy now for these companies in real time, looking forward the next couple of years? Do you want to bet the ranch? Do you hedge? So I'd be curious of your thoughts.
Well, I don't think you ever want to bet the ranch. That doesn't always work. I think sometimes I wish I was 30 years younger, because I think some of the opportunities that are going to be available to, as we think about reimagining the built environment, are so exciting. I think over the next couple of years, it's how you develop that strategy. I mean, real estate is so long. It is not a video game. I used to say that to analysts who would say, this is not a video game. I can't sell California and buy Austin when you like Austin better than you like California. So it is a long-term game. But I do think, as we think about, and we've had some things revealed during COVID, right? So how do we think about the built environment and how our demographics are changing? And what does that mean? I think the obvious question is, as I said, as the chairman of Columbia, how do we think about office today? Do I believe that the office is dead? No, we just finished talking about culture. I think the office is we've seen how companies have their offices defined who they are and the culture that they want. You can walk into different offices and kind of tell who they are. But how do we think about that, and how much space? And then what do we do with old office buildings that don't work anymore? How are they repositioned? How do we think about housing of all kinds? I think that's going to be one of the challenges for real estate leaders for the next several decades. How do we make housing more affordable, more inclusive, more supportive? I mean, we can see the challenges when they're not. I'm sitting here in San Francisco. We can see the issues when we don't have affordable housing, we don't have supportive housing, how it impacts those most affected and those who live here. And so housing is something that is sort of near and dear to my heart. But how do we think about that going forward? How do we think about retail? I've gotten kind of used to having groceries delivered, but am I ever going to go to a grocery store again? Yeah, I think so. And so how do we think about all that and the various different people? And we've got baby boomers, we're all retiring. We all think we're never going to die. We're just going to keep, young and active. But how do we think about that segment that is a very wealthy segment? What do we do with them? And what do we do with the Gen Zs that are, the next in line to start changing the way we think about everything? I think about, driverless cars. It's like, how do I think about, I'll be dead by the time those are really around a lot. But how do we think about space? How do we think about reimagining our cities and our buildings? I think about an apartment building that's got a podium garage, and every podium cannot be an Amazon distribution center. Some can. Some could be urban farms, but what do we do with them when we don't need cars? We've seen during COVID, these great little parklets are now taking up parking spaces on our streets. And it's created a vibrancy in our cities during a period of time when it's not very vibrant. So how do we make that sustainable and structural? Is it a structural change? So I think it's kind of like in 2005, we were working on a project that we thought would stabilize in 2015. So 10 years forward. And I remember sitting down and talking with the team and saying, okay, is everybody going to have a flat screen TV? I know that sounds funny today, but I said, if they do, that changes the way we think about configuring the living room. I said, is anybody going to have a landline? Now, this was before iPhones, but it certainly wasn't before cell phones. So how do we think about that? And how do we think about the space and what is it we're building? And in 2005, I said, our average our average resident is 27 years old. So in 2005, they were 7. So what was a 7-year-old thinking about at the time? So I think that's the way we have to think about it is, there was just an article the other day in the Wall Street about, is it going to be as easy to rent an apartment as it is to get food delivery? Because everybody wants everything now and fast and convenient and flexible. Well, how does that, for us who are long-term investors, how do we think about a customer who may not want to think about the real estate the same way we do, and how do we think about leases and how do we price them? And so to me, like I said, I wish I was 30 years younger, because I think this next several decades are going to be so interesting as we think about how it's shifting, both in terms of demographics and just the current built environment and what do we do with it. COVID has accelerated how we think about some of this stuff. And then it's how quickly we can execute on it. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time. But I would be having those strategic questions with my team about what are we doing for the future, and then what are we doing with our existing portfolio, and how do we think about it differently, and where do we want to invest for the long term? So that's how I'd be thinking about it.